Greetings, everyone. Welcome back to Gerd Talks, another conversation with Gerd Leonhard and a guest. Today, I'm with Sangeet Paul Choudary, who is based in Dubai. And he's an author of a book called Reshuffle. And we connected on the internet to talk about AI. And of course, a lot of people are talking about AI these days. That's pretty much the only topic left. We figured we should have a conversation and speak about his book and a little bit about my book, which is now 10 years old, that already spoke about AI. So please do tell us about your book.
Thank you, Gerd. Pleasure to be here. It's quite curiously, my book, even though it's about AI, it starts by calling out the fact that we're too focused on AI as a set of technologies. We're not focused on how systems work when technologies are introduced in them. So how do our organizations change? How do our workflows change? How do our ecosystems in which companies work together? How does that change? And how do economies and societies change? And the book is largely about the effects of technology on larger systems. There are two key points that I want to highlight, which the book talks about. The first is that when it comes to AI, we are a little too focused on thinking about the impact of AI on tasks. We don't think of the system within which the task sits, because a task has meaning in a larger system. A task sits inside a workflow. The workflow sits inside larger organizational systems. Those organizations compete inside ecosystems, and multiple overlapping ecosystems constitute an economy. So in order for us to think about the impact of AI, we really need to think about its impact at all those different levels. We cannot just say AI is good at replacing this task or making this task better, and so it's automation or augmentation. It's not just as binary as that. We need to think about systemic effects. The second point that it makes is when we think about systemic effects, how do systems change? Systems typically change through two forces. There are forces that break a system into its components, and then there are forces that bring it back together and recombine. So a simple way to think about it is we've seen, with the rise of digital technologies, we've seen progressive modularization of services, right? With cloud computing, you can now have compute as a service. You can have payments as a service. That's a way of breaking a traditional monolithic system into pieces. But then you bring those pieces back and you create a new business model. That's recombination. And what AI does is it brings these two effects of modularity or unbundling and recombination or rebundling into more knowledge-based work as well, into things that were typically used to sit in our head, were based on carefully acquired skills. Those now become available for unbundling and rebundling. So you can restructure workflows, you can rethink organizations, you can rethink business models. That's at a high level, those are the issues that this book talks about.
Yeah, it's powerful stuff. This is, of course, my daily work, your daily work also with clients. Right now is a really confusing time when a lot of people think of AI as either sort of doomers or boomers. And I think obviously that's not the case either way around. Every technology can be used for bad things. AI has particular potential for that when we think about displacement of work on the routine side, for example, commodity work, but also on the abuse side. So, spamming, nefarious activities and digital money and so on and so on. There's a lot of discussion on this. I think it's also being heated up by the fact that it has become such a financial arms race, and that it's basically the biggest game ever in terms of investment. And it's only going to be followed by quantum computing and synthetic biology. So we have wave after wave of this really truly fundamentally changing paradigms, including nuclear fusion, so that we had unlimited energy. So in a way, you could say, I always argue about this, that we have possibly unlimited intelligence, logic at least. Then we have unlimited power, energy. And then we have unlimited organic changes like biology, right? And so all these waves are coming together now, which makes for a pretty confusing debate about what in the end we are talking about. So I think one of the key components of your book was the question, what do we want to end up with? What kind of system do we want? And this is really what is reshuffling, is forcing us to rethink not just, how we do business or, what software is and so on, but the very fundamental question, what do we want to be as humans? What kind of society do we want? And what in the end is our economic logic? Because AI is fundamentally changing that economic logic, because it may end up being abundance in so many places that we don't know how that will be monetized, or let's put it this way, how we're going to generate momentum in an economy that's based on scarcity, which is a contradiction in itself. So I always say it could be nirvana or it could be hell, depending on our wisdom of decision. So, what do you say in your book about this kind of, how do we build this new logic?
Yeah, no, I think you teased quite a few interesting threads over there, and I'll try to string them together because they are very interconnected. Your first point about, when we think about the impact of AI, we tend to think about it in a very binary fashion. It's doom or gloom. The point that I try to make in the book is that it's very possible for the pie to be expanded and yet not be divided equally. So we're not talking about zero sum versus positive sum. The doomers are thinking zero sum, the boomers thinking positive sum. It's not just those two. Even if it's positive sum, and I think at this point, most people believe that AI is going to have positive sum effects and in ways vastly more than we can imagine. There's no clear paths to saying that the larger pie will be divided equally. So in order to understand what the future systems will look like, we need to think about what grows the pie, and more importantly, what are the tensions that come up between different players according to which this gets then sliced and divided. And I think that's really the starting point in terms of how to think about where this is headed. The second point that you mentioned, which is really prescient and right on point, is this whole idea of abundance. And I think abundance is not just at the level of, when we first went to digital, we said that the scarcity associated with physical constraints are going away. But now the scarcity associated with sort of the inputs to capitalism, if you will, intelligence, energy, biology, even material science. And if you think of, what is happening with China and space, even building logistics systems which are interplanetary, like the attempts to create abundance into the very inputs of capitalism, that's dramatically powerful, because the second and third order effects of that are very interesting. I mean, if I just take a simple example, if you look at SpaceX with Starship and Starlink, right? And if Starship brings down the cost of space logistics to a very low level so that it becomes much cheaper to launch satellites, what that then does is it creates the ability to have highly targeted geolocation at a level that is really deeply granular and way beyond what it is today, which then if you combine with AI coming in warfare and new models like Anduril coming in, combining the intelligent weapons with highly granular geo-targeting could create fundamentally new ways of managing warfare. So my point is that the second and third order effects of some of this abundance are where the really interesting things get unlocked. We can't necessarily predict what's going to happen, but if we don't understand the first principles of how these things get unlocked, we won't be in a position to create the right frameworks and the right models to harness them. And that's really the key, challenge of our time in a way.
Yeah, interesting point. I think that abundance and capitalism are not really compatible in that way, at least not traditional capitalism. And we've been on the Milton Friedman track for a long time, and that's crashing now exactly because of this. If we have abundance and we have more efficiency, more productivity gains of, efficiency of 30-40% more using AI, what do we do with all of that? And if that creates abundance, for example, I'm only working 3 or 4 hours a day because I have abundant help, do I get the same money? Where does the money go? Does it go to my boss? These are all big systematic questions. And currently we're not prepared to take those questions, also because we are still separating technology and science from social and politics too much. And we're thinking in left, right, populism, socialism, capitalism, drawers, and that no longer matters, because the only thing that matters is, can we use this amazing breakthroughs, all of those that are coming, to create a good future logic in a new economic sense that works for most, 98% of us, for there's always going to be some that feel disadvantaged, but more than 50% if possible, right? Can that be done? And how do we do that? And what does it mean? And I think it will very much not look like it does today, with the stock market also incentivizing bad behavior and pushing over, for example, what we have now is this idea of the AI Manhattan Project. And this is all about power and military, and it's not actually, for global flourishing. So I think your book has the step in that direction. We have to think of this systematically and reshuffle not just the tools but also the purpose. Right? And I think the Middle Eastern region, for example, this is a huge leap, because now we're here and we have to reshuffle the reason why we do this and what do we actually want. I was just in Dubai, where I filmed a little trailer for CNN about the future of Dubai. And it was really interesting because, the stuff that's happening there is just mind-boggling. Now, we do have to ask the question, what is the destination? And how does it work with everyone else? And this is really what AI is pushing us to do. We can't leave out the context. Otherwise, we end up like the oil companies. We have great progress and we can fly an airplane and drive a car and power the industrial society, but the side effect is not good.
Absolutely. I think you're very much on point. I think there are two things that we need to be cognizant of. The first thing is that from a policy perspective and from how we think about systems, over the past 3 decades in particular, and this is nothing unique to the past 3 decades, but we've created the tools to accelerate it in the past 3 decades. We've consistently found new ways to socialize costs and privatize returns, or socialize risks and privatize returns, right? And whether it's the rise of derivatives and financialization, or whether it's the rise of platforms where the risk associated with owning a car very often is with the driver, but Uber tries to capture most of the returns from the driver's participation. We've created new mechanisms, and it's inherent in the nature of networks to enable these mechanisms to operate at scale. Because if you have a way to externalize risk and privatize returns, and if you can scale that because of networks, largely because of accumulation of data and because of network effects, then you can, it can have quite dramatic dismantling effects on a lot of the traditional protective structures that we had. A lot of traditional protective institutional structures that we have are no longer funded to the same extent that they used to be in the past. And that, again, does not have that counterbalancing effect that would take care of something like this. So I guess my challenge today, when I hear about people talking about universal basic income and reskilling and things of this sort, is they seem like reactive cop-out answers because we don't have an actual answer. Because until we can find an answer that addresses the question of how do we stop this radiation and socializing of risk and privatization of returns, and how do we manage risk and returns better across the entire system, and how do we do that and create stability, until that happens, we don't have a systemic solution to the issue that we have today. So that's one point I just want to leave on the table here. And the second thing, since we talk about abundance, the second point I'll just make is, in response to abundance, there's always scarcity. Does scarcity go away? Not necessarily, but the new form of scarcity is very different. So a simple example being that distribution used to be scarce, but with the internet, distribution became abundant. And so our attention spans became scarce, our ability to stick to something, and hence the value shifted from owning the resources of distribution or owning distribution capacity to owning attention harvesting capacity. And that's what, the large surveillance capitalism firms of today do. So I think we need to really look at what's becoming abundant. Well, if skills that were difficult to acquire and knowledge that was difficult to acquire and apply, that becomes increasingly abundant, what are the new scarcities that emerge? I talk about some of those scarcities in the book, but those scarcities keep on shifting. And if we want to think about what should we be doing, what should our jobs in the future look like, if we are running a business, what should that look like? We have to have a very solid thesis on here's what's scarce today, here's what will be scarce tomorrow, and we need to keep revisiting that. And what is scarce may not follow the traditional definitions, because 25 years back, nobody would have thought of this idea of attention being scarce. And so that's the key idea. We need to look for the new scarcity as well.
Yeah, this is a super important point. I mean, I see that all the time in my business, but also in my clients' business, new scarcities, and sometimes they're hard to find. And once we found them, we also have to kind of protect them. Like, for example, I think the simulation potential of AI could mean that eventually people feel like, this really badly produced video is good enough because it's a simple simulation. And a musician does not need 10,000 hours to learn the instrument. 10 hours on the iPad get the same results. And so I think these are sort of reductionism, right? And I think that we really have to protect that also as a way of saying, you can't reduce the human effort, because the way that we interact also, there's a certain logic and order to it, right? And it requires effort. And if you remove the effort, you remove the result. You just fake the result. And I think in business, that is so crucial. You cannot fake the result because people will do it once and they will never come back, right? And they will realize that we're duped, parenthesis, or it's not really worth it. And there's no relationship, because I think this is the really important thing. And I saw that in your book also, the importance of how you relate to people when you use technology to interact with them. You don't want to take yourself out of the loop so that you become a black box to them or that you become a commodity. This is, I think, one of the biggest challenges of business today is you become a commodity, and commodities are easily outdone. And dropped by the wayside, So I think this is a crucial point. Your book has been out for a while, right? A few weeks, or how long has it been out now? Months?
It's exactly a month today. It came out on 20th July.
Great. And I see it's a bestseller on Amazon. Congratulations to that. So is there a website for the book, or where should people look to find out about the book?
It's available on Amazon. If you'd like to follow what's happening with the book, and I do a lot of subsequent analysis around topics in the book, I have a Substack called platforms.substack.com. You can also look up reshufflebook.com, which is the website for the book. But the best place to follow updates on the book is platforms.substack.com.
Yeah, Substack has become a meeting place for all of this, and that there's a few good things that are happening despite everything else. YouTube is becoming run over with bots and AI, but Substack is now giving us the real thing. So I'm also quite happy about Substack and that becoming a great alternative. So anything else you want to add for people to know about the book or YouTube stuff? You have some keynotes on this topic as well, right?
A lot of my work started in the platform economy. So a lot of what is on my YouTube channel is closer to the platform economy. I would just add a couple of points about the book for people who are interested in checking it out. The motivation for writing this book really came out because even though my work focuses on helping companies think about competitive advantage and strategy, I saw that repeatedly people were stumbling because they had the wrong framing of how to think about AI. And so the book is structured in a way where the first section sets up the framing, takes you away from the task-centric framing to the system-centric, takes you away from the technology to the system. The second section talks about jobs. The third talks about organizations, and the fourth talks about competitive advantage. So I believe that, unlike how we think about AI coming after my job versus AI strategy, they're not in completely distinct topics. They're all closely interrelated because the effect of AI happens at every level. And so that's really been my attempt with kind of connecting these topics together in the book. So if folks are interested in understanding that whole arc, Reshuffle is a good place to see that.
So thanks again, Sangeet Paul Choudary, for being here. We hope to see each other in real life sometime.
Absolutely.
Some events somewhere. And thanks for tuning in, and see you later on this show. Thank you.
Thank you, Gerd.